Welcome to FadeIn, Carnegie Screenwriters' look at the film industry in Pittsburgh. I'm your host, Carrie Collins, and I'm very pleased to introduce our very first guest on our very first show, Mr. Carl Kurlander. Carl, you are a screenwriter, a filmmaker, a senior lecturer at Pitt, and you are also co-founder of Steel Town Entertainment. Thanks so much for joining us on our first show.
Well, thanks. I'm guilty of charge of all those things. So.
So you're a native Pittsburgher, and you are working in the film industry in Pittsburgh now, but that wasn't always the case when you started.
Yeah, I actually had a horrible introduction to Pittsburgh. I grew up here, but my mother and father got divorced. My dad's a doctor from Cleveland, and she divorced him and married a doctor in Pittsburgh. So my first joke was my mother never gets divorced, she just gets referred to another husband, but
But seriously, folks.
And I didn't know growing up that jokes could make a living. I actually got beat up in public school here, so I got a scholarship to Shadyside where I got beat up by richer kids, I like to say. And then, I was supposed to be, a pre-med student at Duke. I had a crush on a girl who I met when she was a waitress at the St. Elmo Hotel. Her name's Lynn Snyderman. She was from Pittsburgh, and I became infatuated with her, which today is called stalking.
Right.
But I mailed her a short story while I was at Duke, and she loved the short story, and she said, "You should be a writer," and I got a free scholarship to Universal. So St. Elmo's Fire, the short story.
Right.
I learned on the job as an intern there how to write screenplays, and
that was your very first script, St. Elmo's Fire.
Yes.
Which was one of the seminal Brat Pack movies of the 80s.
Well, they hate that term.
There are several quintessential moments in a man's life. Losing his virginity, getting married, becoming a father, and having the right girl smile at you.
I had a short story, and Lynn loved the short story, so I thought, she'll love the movie. And the kids who were interning with me were at USC and UCLA, so I would read their notes, I'd read scripts for the studio. So I learned screenwriting basically like a lot of screenwriters people in LA, just by reading other people's work and reading Sid Field's screenplay. And then I wrote the screenplay, and I used to get arrested every weekend at the studio because my apartment was smaller than the office they had me at Universal, so I'd stay every weekend.
Oh,
and
wow.
The security,
literally arrested?
Well, the security guy would come in, the head of the studio. I was intern to Tom Mountain, who was running the studio at the time, and he said, "I see security wrote you up for staying in the office over the weekend." And at the end of my internship, I gave him the first draft of St. Elmo's Fire. Okay. And then he read it and said, "You're in serious trouble now." And he called an agent, and I got an agent.
Wow.
And then after many years I waited tables, and I got gazpacho with no croutons, no sour cream, and chopstick inside for a guy named Joel Schumacher,
right,
who was writing and directing a movie with Mr. T called DC Cab. So
another seminal movie.
Yeah, well, it's connected. You wouldn't know it, but
True.
it took place in DC.
Okay.
And then one rainy Thursday, I was getting Joel whatever lunch order was there, and we're talking. I talked to him about my short story and my screenplay, and he read that, and he really liked it. And the next day, he came to me and said, "I think we should write a screenplay about people right after college and use your title and your script, and let's write it together."
And you wrote it together. Wow,
Yeah.
That's a great first writing partner.
Yeah, it was interesting because, that's a mentorship that, Joel loved to write ensemble, and I had never written that before. And but I was really 24 years old, so I really was living that experience. And Joel was 20 years older than I, so he had the experience, and I had stories, and it was a great way in, yeah.
And then that led to many years of you writing for CBS, Disney.
Yeah, well, what
Knox.
happens is, this is how the world works out there. So, first you get a lot of lunch orders, and you realize that's really what Hollywood's all about. And I was on sets, yeah, whatever experience you can get. And then you get lucky enough to get a movie made, and then suddenly your agent called you and says they'd like you to write another movie. And at that time, there was Steve Tisch, who produced Risky Business, wanted to do a movie called Baby Talk, about a guy who, when his wife leaves him, thinks he can understand what babies are saying. So they called me in, and I'm like, well, that's an odd idea, but I had a story I came up with, and they said, well, I said, but I don't think I should do this. My agent said, well, we don't say no. We just ask them for more money than they'll pay. That's how we say no.
Okay.
So we did that, and we had a meeting with Mike Medavoy at Orion, and strangely enough, they agreed to pay it.
They wanted, yes.
So that's called writing for assignment, and I then spent many years writing scripts for every studio and getting paid to write, unlike St. Elmo's Fire, which was a spec script.
Wow. It's quite a spec script also. And then many years later, several years later, you came back to Pittsburgh. What was the jump from writing for hire there and coming back here? How did that happen?
Well, what happens, you know, I after St. Elmo's Fire and then writing all these scripts and getting paid a lot of money but not really getting them made, it was very frustrating. I wrote pilots, and at that time nobody went from film to TV, but I love both, so I love doing that. And then one of my pilots for NBC was read by a guy named Peter Engel, who had a show called Saved by the Bell. They asked me to come in and meet, and I was like, my wife used to wake me up early to watch that show, and I'm like, I'm not gonna write for the show. But I met him, and my agent assured me that the show was not gonna be on long, and I should just try.
Oh, wow.
I never had a day job because when you get hired as a writer, you go and you have pitch meetings, and you dress up in your sweater, and you pitch people, and then you go and you spend 2 months away writing, and then hand in your drafts. So TV is very different, and so they offered me a job as a writer-producer on Saved by the Bell. It was near the end of Saved by the Bell, the original, and they were doing all these spin-offs. And so I thought, oh, we'll go for 6 weeks and 9 weeks, and then it was 2 years, and then 4 years, and then they kept spinning them off all through the 90s.
Wow.
So I became what they call a showrunner, or the head writer of the 5th spin-off of Saved by the Bell, which was a cross between Baywatch and Saved by the Bell, called Malibu CA, which was a crazy idea.
Sorry to say I did not see that one.
Yes, I can understand how you wouldn't. And the strange thing is, this is how it works in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So he goes, I got a great show for you, Malibu. I'm like, well, what is that?
Malibu what?
I'm the last person you would do. Well, he said, Malibu CA. And I'm like, what's the CA stand for? Like California. So I didn't know, but he said, I have a meeting with Tribune with Dick Askins in a week. Come up with an idea. So I came up with the idea, I pitched it, and it's always how it works in Hollywood.
Yeah.
The idea that you never really thought 2 cents about, they ordered
Someone likes it.
22 episodes.
Wow.
16 million
So
right on
full.
the table.
Wow.
You're now the head writer of the show.
And showrunner.
And the showrunner. And basically, and that's, at the time, Peter was very smart, and Dick, they both knew about foreign syndication and other things, and they had this model.
But as showrunner, you bring in all of the crew, you bring in the,
what
the
happens
casting.
is, you do all the creative decisions. So I had a guy named Chris Conte who was the line producer, so he made sure the budget, somebody handled all that, and then I handle all the casting. What happens is you have to write a script a week. So, and ironically, there was a friend of mine in the office next to us named David Cohan, and he had a script called Will and Grace. They had 1 episode, and we got 22 picked up, and he's like,
wow.
You got 22 episodes for that. And then we got another pickup. So suddenly I'm writing all these episodes, and I had a beautiful house above Sunset, and I just had my daughter Campbell, and but that's when I started to feel like Holden Caulfield's older brother who wrote one good short story and sold out. So I was making a lot of money, and but I wasn't feeling like, like, is this my life's destiny?
Yeah.
And I spent money back every year to Shadyside as a scholarship kid to say thank you. And 1 year I lost my credit card, so I had to email the woman, and she said, oh, our English teacher's leaving. Why don't you come back here and teach for a year?
Ah.
And I went to Shadyside, and they wanted me to teach Beowulf, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. And then Pitt heard about it, and they said, well, why don't you come teach screenwriting at Pitt?
Okay.
So we put our stuff in storage. We had no intention of staying in Pittsburgh.
Really?
And we just came here for a year.
Yeah.
And
what year was that?
that was in 2001, right before 9/11. I was
Yes.
here 2 weeks. Along the way, we did my dermatologist offered me money for a movie, so we did a movie called My Tale, Two Cities. And we sang Won't You Be My Neighbor for that movie in New York and in LA.
Since we live together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please, won't you be my neighbor?
Now here comes the dancing part, so come up and join in.
And I discovered I loved Pittsburgh. Everything I hated about growing up.
Right.
I live right next to Whiteman Playground where I used to get beat up as a kid. But now I love to take my daughter there.
Sure.
And the neighbors were also nice. And I wrote a Christmas letter back saying, greetings from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And I remember my agent, Rob Carlson, his wife, Carolyn Ginsberg, had a comedy at ABC, and she said, wow, that's the best thing you've written in years. And I'm like,
Ouch.
well, but it's true. I mean, I was writing from the heart.
Yes.
So I was like,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah.
maybe this is destiny. And then, strangely enough, got a call from Oprah Winfrey's
I was
producer.
going to ask about that. So this move to Pittsburgh then landed you on Oprah Winfrey.
yourself, what should I do with my life? The answer is not always to make a drastic career change. Carl Kurlander was on the right track when he set out to become a writer. He discovered he was in the wrong place, though, writing in the wrong voice.
Now you're asking yourself, how does a guy like me end up on Oprah? You know, life is
Very
not
similar
linear.
to this show
yeah,
right now,
by the way, I
way.
wish you all of her success. What people don't realize is, like a lot of things, Oprah started locally, and she ended up in Chicago. But the way I ended up in there was, I had a friend, Poe Bronson, who I really didn't know. I had emailed with when I was doing a script in Hollywood about the Gatsby and the internet, and he'd written a lot about Silicon Valley. And he was writing a book called What Should I Do With My Life? And he came to interview somebody else here, and he said, well, I'm here, I'll say, let's catch up. And I had bought my daughter a little rubber mouse from the variety store on Walnut Street, and I had dropped it in the snow, and I remember my phone rang, and I was holding Campbell, and in Hollywood, if your phone rings and you're holding your daughter, you drop her. Could be your agent. Right? I'm like, who's going to call me in Pittsburgh? So we found the rubber mouse, I put her in the car seat, and I checked it, and he goes, this is Dana, I'm a producer from the Oprah Winfrey Show. We heard you moved to Pittsburgh. We think that's fascinating, and we're doing a show on people who change their life, and we'd love to have you on the show.
And you ended up sitting with Oprah, talking about your move back to Pittsburgh.
The key is to live an authentic life. And you didn't feel authentic, did you not, when you were
In Hollywood, I don't know how that happened.
The sad thing is, you know, on the show was an attorney who became a baker, and he gave out the cake to everyone in the audience, and people went, oh, cake, yay, cake. And then the next one was a surgeon who'd become a shoe designer, and she gave out mink slippers.
Nice.
Shoes, mink slippers.
Wow.
People were, yay! And then Oprah goes, and now here's Carl. He was a screenwriter who moved to Pittsburgh to teach. And
Gonna hand out
I've had
paper,
pierogies or nothing.
Business cards that you collected over the years.
I had no idea. And but I did realize like something was happening, and sadly that was in the January 2003, and a series of events happened that kind of changed my life and Pittsburgh's on some level. I had written an article in the Post-Gazette saying that our biggest export was talent, not steel, and that talent made billions for people in New York and people in LA, but that we exported that talent. And if Pittsburgh really wanted to have an industry and an entertainment industry, you would have to bring back the talent. And so that article got read by some people, and at the same time, right after I was on Oprah, sadly, Fred Rogers passed away. So people realized that Fred, who had worked at NBC and come back, had a huge legacy here.
Right.
My friend Bernie, who worked for the producer Steve Tisch of Whiskey Business Plan, that David talked from, we used to Federal Express Minnie's Pizza, so when I was teaching here, he came back because his mother lived in the cathedral, and so he had become president of Village Roadshow, which did The Matrix and Training Day in Ocean's 11. Training Day was directed by Antoine Fuqua, who ironically went to Alderdice, where Bernie went, and Rob Marshall went there, and suddenly all this Pittsburgh list formed. And so what happened was we had so much talent that was from here, and when Fred Rogers passed away, our idea was, why don't we bring them all together and try to talk about how to do this? And then the Hillman family had us assemble everybody at the Cultural Trust, Pitt, CMU, Point Park, the film office, filmmakers, and Eric Gold, who managed Jim Carrey and Ellen DeGeneres and Vince Vaughn with Jimmy Miller, said, look, Jimmy Miller went to Point Park, I grew up in Churchill, we want to serve the region, we don't want to serve one school. So Steel Ton was kind of formed with the idea that we can pull all these resources together and create an industry here. And that was in 2003, we had the Steel Ton Entertainment Summit.
Right, and that's when you brought these folks literally back into town, sat down.
Yes, yeah. Strangely, there was a wonderful woman named Ellen Weitskander who co-founded this with me, and it wasn't really us. The mothers, we had a mother's lunch, and all of them told their kids they needed to come back. We had no money. They flew themselves in, stayed with their mothers. Jamie Widows, who you know from Hoover, from Animal House, who directed 2.5 Men, Rob Marshall, Peter Ackerman, who wrote Ice Age, Eric Gold, Bernie Goldman, they all came back. Jay Minsky, who created Lizzie McGuire, and they all came back to Fred Rogers' studio because they all knew we grew up here, and we know there's talent in this town, and we'd like to help the city develop a new industry, because entertainment is now regional, and you can do it here, unlike when we were growing up. Now it's really possible, is what they said.
So there you are with this idea and all this talent who has a lot of interest in it. How do you then take that to become what Steel Town is today, which really is more of a, would you call it a mentoring program now for?
It's confusing about Steel Town because we wear so many hats.
You do.
And that all came from the day after the summit. We all had them behind the scenes in Ellen's living room, and one of the first things they wanted to do was mentor people.
Okay.
That all came from Eric Gold, who called me one day. Please hold for Eric Gold. He goes, yes. He goes, I'm here with my mother. I'm at Eden Park. I said, yeah. He said, he had just spoken to my students at Pitt, and he said, look, how about the next time I'm back here, or Bernie Goldman, or Jamie Widows, why don't you get the best writers here, let them pitch us our ideas, we'll see which ones we like, we'll tell them to write it, it'll suck, we'll fire them. I'm like, you can't fire them. He goes, okay, we won't fire them, but we'll show them how we develop stuff, and then we'll try to sell it in Hollywood. And that was an idea called the Film Factory. But to be honest, I'd never done a nonprofit before, and for 5 years, we didn't have any money or any resources to do this. But at the summit, Bernie met George Romero, and they tried to do Land of the Dead here.
Okay.
But there was a thing called tax incentives in Canada.
Right.
So we found out the hard way, even though both Bernie and George wanted to shoot here, that money is where it goes.
So they took the Night of the Living Dead team and shot in Canada instead of Pittsburgh.
And then that led to, what happened was, Greg Nicotero, we had the premiere here, and Quentin Tarantino flew in, and he said, Pittsburgh's where independent film started in America.
That's true.
Because of George Romero. And Greg Nicotero, who was the one who brought him in that is Walking Dead, said, look, I'm working on a new project called R.L. Stein's Don't Think About It, and I met with Margaret Lash, who was the producer, and she said, we're going to go to Canada, but we managed to raise Ellen and Stephanie Dangle and myself and Lewis, managed to raise a third of they had a $3 million budget. So they shot here in 2006.
And that was R.L. Stein's The Haunting Hour.
That was The Haunting Hour. So that was the first time we realized that money could be used to leverage and to get more people work local.
And Steel Town was a producer on that.
Yeah, Steel Town, it was done in association with Steel Town.
Great.
And that was a model. And then that money started to come back so we could fund other programs. And so on top of that,
I'm sorry, is that what happened with the chair as well?
Yeah, it's the same model, which we think is a great model, which is if you put, there's tax credits now, but also if you can leverage some other money, and then you can use that money, like in that case, the chair we did with Point Park.
Right.
So over 40 Point Park students and alumni worked on it. They got salaries. You can develop your local workforce because when a big movie comes in, they bring a lot of out-of-town people.
They do. They do hire a lot of Pittsburghers, but they bring in a lot of their own as well.
Yeah, and obviously what we want to do, the reason other states lose tax credits like North Carolina or Michigan is they don't have enough local for it to justify the tax credits.
Okay.
So part of our strategy, and again, Steel Town is really, I said to Audrey Hillman Fisher, who started this, like, why are we doing a nonprofit? It's a for-profit industry. And she said, I'm on the board of a nonprofit that makes a profit. It's called UPMC. And I think the arts can save Pittsburgh. And I'm like, well, the arts is what you do in your rich steel industry and you patronize it. But the entertainment industry is really economic development. So really what Steel Town is we're a regional economic development force that's trying to help the film industry here. The film office brings the movies here. We're trying to develop the region as a whole, more long-term.
So you're really separate from the film office. That's sort of off courting the big films and TV shows and bringing them here.
Yeah, and they play an essential role, and it's great.
Absolutely.
But the hard thing is, there's so many resources here. If we don't start organizing them, then really the hard thing is that it's a win-win for everyone. So everyone, the film office is a key component we have here.
So you've also started something fairly recently called Steel Town Indie, correct?
Yeah, that came out of the Film Factory, which came out of Eric's call.
Okay.
And that's where a guy named John Delarison said, why don't you come over to the studio I'm part of? And he was a scholarship kid at Pitt who helped start a studio called Lionsgate. He does also co-owns Film Finance, the largest film bonding company. And John not only came back and talked to Rendell and helped get the tax credits changed, but he also realized strategically how this would all work. So I mentioned that because the Film Factory 6 years ago came, and per Eric's idea, we did stuff at Point Park, CMU, Pitt, filmmakers, and we still do that. Yeah. But we would give out money, $30,000 for short films, and the problem is, short films are great, but they had to be 12 pages.
Right.
We'd screen them at the Lionsgate screening room. John would get us at Lionsgate, but Lionsgate isn't going to take a 12-minute movie and go, oh, we want that. And so the idea was, after a while, we realized several great things happened. One is, it really was a larger community that worked on all the films. You had a film, I know, also.
I did,
that was
as a
part
matter
of
of
the
fact,
community. And really what it is, it's all those people who work on each other's movies. So we wanted to help do that. but we wanted to be more intentional. I realized the Tribeca Incubator, which does movies like Obvious Child or Sundance Labs, that we have just as many great people mentoring.
Absolutely.
So we wanted to give money, but also we wanted to make sure that we're more intentional so that these projects a year or two from now can actually see the light of day. It's hard enough, but at least we think we have the talent here.
Right.
So we're still doing Steel Ton Film Factory in a new incarnation, which is called Steel Ton Indie. So we did the Film Factory for 5 years, and we gave out this money, but a couple things were happening. One is, even when we gave people $5,000, they would go crowdsource this movie, help it, they'd get it made. Yeah. So that was great.
Yeah.
And then we had a community showcase where we gave people $500, and we got 10 movies that ended up getting made. And then we realized it's really the support we were giving people. And then another thing happened, which is, I got a call from some Point Park grads who said, we just got $25,000 for the Wyoming Film Prize. And they were doing a film called Cardinal Matters. And they said, if you give us $10,000, we can finish the feature. I said, wait, $10,000 you're finishing a feature? And everybody from Pittsburgh is going to Wyoming?
Yeah.
And LA, they met at Wyoming. And I'm going, wait, you can do features now for under $100,000. And they did that. And then there was a project called Back for Good that Bailey Donovan, who's a very talented young man who, with his sister Molly, were working on this film Back for Good, and they also said, look, we want to do a micro-budget feature, and so at that year, we get these grants from foundations, and we were able to target that and give them a little money, and sure enough, Back for Good is now a feature that's going to festivals.
It is, and we have a clip of that now.
We all knew you were leaving, but no one ever talked about it. And then you were just gone.
You're the one who said we shouldn't talk.
I'd wake up every day and wonder what you were doing, who you were with. I just couldn't. Sometimes I swear I still pick up on you. And how you're feeling. Like E.T.
Ouch.
Ouch.
So what Steel Ton Indie became is an intentional, and we just announced our first Steel Ton Indie class.
And how many filmmakers are in that class? And is it all films, or is there some television?
That's what's interesting. It's film, it's television, it could be web series, it's the Wild West. And again, I'm going to quote the wonderful Steve Trabosky about this. I called him and asked him if he could help because he's a great Pittsburgher, and he said, I will not be on any selection committee. I don't blame him. He's like, I want a mentor, but the selecting is the worst part, and we hope these will become rolling grants because really what it is at certain points we just want to be able to catalyze promising talent and filmmakers.
And just sort of give them a push, give them a little nudge.
Yeah, and frankly, what we want to do is have an eye to, are these projects that we can mentor with people that can have an impact in Pittsburgh, and sometimes there'll be people who are here, sometimes there'll be people who want to move back here, sometimes there'll be projects that just need a little boost. Right. And so this was our pilot program. We just announced the first 6 people who each got $5,000, but more than that, we've started to mentor that, and I'd love to talk about that more.
That sounds great. And those are 2 short films, I believe, a feature, a web series, and a television series.
I'm glad you know it.
Right? I think that's it.
See, this is how it works. There was, for instance, Garrett Kennel had done this wonderful. He and David Light had done a film called Dot, which was a great short that we loved. And we're like, they had submitted that, and that originally they wanted to do that as a feature, and they'd done Milkman, which is a wonderful short they'd done also. But ironically, they had a script called Buzz, which we loved, and so that's the project they're doing through the Steel Ton Indie program.
That's terrific. We do have a clip of the Milkman, which is another one of their projects, which we'll show to you now.
Ooh, Milkman, keep those bottles quiet.
Quiet!
Come tour the incredibly serene and distant waterfalls of Glacier National Park. Marvel at all 1,800 square miles. The continent's best.
Breaking news. We're sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming. Radioactive cows are responsible for the worst milk contamination in recorded human history. Fatal danger. Do not drink. I repeat, do not drink.
One of the great projects that's been going on here is, if anyone's been to the Arcade Comedy Theater, which is a wonderful resource here, they've been doing a live-action sitcom called Sister Sorella. Yeah. So Sister Sorella, again, they knew how to do theater. They didn't know how to do television or a web series. So we're mentoring that, and we've had some television people go give them advice, and they're going to shoot that soon as a web series or a pilot. Again, they're trying to decide that. Another great thing that we've done is there was Charlotte Glenn, who did Immaculate Reception, which was at Sundance.
Terrific.
She has another of her Pittsburgh trilogy that she wants to shoot here, and so that's a feature which she is writing, which we're giving her some money to help get it to the next level. One of the great teams that we found is there's a script called Candyland, and that was written by Don Amon and Chris Venus. Don grew up in Pitcairn, and it was about his life in the 80s back then, and it's a wonderful script. And then we have a wonderful guy named Demetrius Wren, who, if you ever watched the Daniel Tiger Neighborhood, the Fred Rogers Company,
yes.
They used to do the interstitials, and they had a great idea about an African-American woman who moves back to Pittsburgh, and it's more of a social conscience movie, which Pittsburgh really should be doing projects like that.
Yeah.
I always know I'm going to miss one. It's like having children. You're like, wait, there's this, and there's another thing that we think is so amazing about Pittsburgh. There's so many things.
Yeah.
Is we think the intersection between entertainment, technology, and entertainment is going to happen because kids are going to be looking on their laptop. So. Yes. There's a great group of people who've done have done short films about Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, yes.
So one of the projects is for them to do A Telltale Heart as a film and get that into schools.
Use it as an educational tool.
Yeah, and we think, again, there's ways to monetize. And again, this was just the first class. We're hoping to have many more classes after this.
So this will be an annual event then?
Yeah, we hope even perhaps more regularly as a rolling program.
Terrific.
But this is just the beginning, and we're hoping that really what we can do is help support the community. Because really what's happened here is the independent film community has, helped support each other, and you're doing the show at the right time because it's really starting to become one of the best places in the country. Movie Maker magazine wrote that Pittsburgh is one of the best cities in the country.
I read that. I couldn't agree more.
I know, so go we.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fascinating. It's been great to see how Steel Town and you have really helped to bring the film community together and sort of bolster what's already here.
Well, we think this is just the beginning, and we're really hoping, we're excited of you doing the show and partners like Carnegie Screenwriters, and we just think it's another great resource here, and that we hope this is just the beginning of really Pittsburgh. Ellen Weiss-Kander, who started this with me, used to say entertainment could be Pittsburgh's new steel. And we think that's starting to happen.
I hope that's true. We think so as well.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for FadeIn, Carnegie Screenwriters' look at the film industry in Pittsburgh. I'm your host, Caroline Collins, and I will see you next time.